My mother looked at me, her face a perfect porcelain mask, and told me I should have used my 10 years of karate training to stop my instructor from doing what he did. I was 17. I was a black belt. And I was pregnant. She said this was my failure, not his. This is the story of how the one person who should have protected me became the architect of my deepest pain. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from the one you trust the most, stay with me. This story is for you. Make sure you follow, like, and share, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single step of this journey. The confession hangs in the air of our pristine living room, an invisible choking gas. 3 sentences. I am 17. I am pregnant. The father is Master Kenji. Each word is a stone I've thrown into the placid, meticulously maintained pond of our family life, and now we all just watch the ripples spread. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's dense, packed with everything unsaid for the last 17 years. It's a living entity, and it's suffocating me. My father, Robert, is a master of disappearing in plain sight. He isn't looking at me. He isn't looking at my mother. His eyes are fixed on a single intricate knot in the pattern of the Persian rug, as if he can unravel the very fabric of this moment if he just stares hard enough. His shoulders are hunched, a familiar posture of retreat. He is a ship that has permanently lowered its sails, content to be carried by whatever tide my mother creates. I can see the slight tremor in his hand where it rests on his knee. He is a portrait of passivity, a ghost haunting the edges of his own home. My mother, Eleanor, is the opposite. She is all presence, all force. She sits perfectly upright in her wingback chair, the one upholstered in a pale, unforgiving beige. Not a single cushion is out of place. Nothing in her world ever is. She looks directly at me, and her eyes, the same shade of slate gray as my own, are not filled with shock or sorrow. They are calculating. It's the same look she gets when she's assessing a business proposal or inspecting the caterer's work for one of her charity galas. She is appraising me, a flawed product, a failed investment. The grandfather clock in the hall chimes the quarter hour, its heavy metallic dong, a hammer blow against the tension. 1 beat, 2, 3. When she finally speaks, her voice is not raised. It's worse. It's calm, measured, stripped of all warmth. It is the auditory equivalent of polished marble. Ella, she begins, and the sound of my own name from her lips feels like an accusation. You have been a student at the Way of the Serene Fist for a decade, since you were 7 years old. You are a black belt. She pauses, letting the words hang there, letting me feel the weight of that achievement, an achievement that was always more for her than for me. I can feel my own heartbeat, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. 10 years of discipline, 10 years of learning control, defense, awareness. Her gaze doesn't waver. It drills into me. You were taught how to break a wrist, how to disable an opponent twice your size. You know the vital points of the human body. You know how to use an attacker's momentum against them. I want to scream that it wasn't an attack. Not like that. It was a slow poisoning, a careful dismantling of my will that I didn't even recognize until it was too late. But my throat is closed, a tight knot of shame and fear. She leans forward just a fraction, the movement precise and menacing. You should have used your training, she says, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that is far more terrifying than any shout. You should have stopped him. The world narrows. The ornate living room with its silk curtains and artfully arranged books that no one ever reads fades to a blur. The only thing in focus is her face, her perfect, cruel face. And then comes the final, killing blow. She sits back, the motion a final judgment, a dismissal. This is your failure, Ella, not his. Pain. It's a white-hot flash behind my eyes. It's not the memory of Kenji's hands on me, or the cloying scent of the incense he always burned during our private lessons. It's this moment, this absolute soul-shattering betrayal. He took my body, but she, my own mother, is taking my spirit. She is holding my pain up to the light, examining it for flaws, and telling me I crafted it myself. The abuse was a dark, tangled forest I was lost in. Her words are a sterile, brightly lit room where I am pinned and dissected. This is where my story truly begins. Not in the shadows of the dojo, but here, under the cold, unblinking gaze of my mother's disappointment. The sharp, chemical scent of the lemon furniture polish my mother uses on every surface in this house suddenly floods my senses, and it pulls me back. Not to the present, but further back. The scent is no longer in this mausoleum of a living room. It's 10 years ago, mingling with the honest, earthy smell of sweat and the faint, clean aroma of canvas. I am 7 years old, and my hand is swallowed by my mother's. She is walking me through the glass doors of the Way of the Serene Fist Dojo for the first time. The space was huge to me then, a cavern of polished wood floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting an army of small children in white gis, all trying to mimic the impossibly fluid movements of the man at the front. And that man was Master Kenji. In Meadow Creek, Kenji wasn't just a martial arts instructor. He was a local deity. He was tall, with a stillness about him that seemed to command respect without ever demanding it. His movements were like water, flowing and powerful, and his voice was a paradox, gentle enough to soothe a crying child, yet carrying a resonance that cut through the cacophony of a dozen simultaneous kiai shouts. He was a myth made real. For Eleanor, he was something more. He was the embodiment of everything she felt our family lacked and everything she desperately craved: discipline, prestige, control, and an unimpeachable public image. Our family life, behind the curated walls of our perfect house, was a quiet landscape of my father's passivity and my mother's simmering, unspoken dissatisfaction. Kenji and his dojo were the antidote. This was where her daughter would be forged into something strong, something impressive, something worthy of her. I remember her grip on my hand, tight and insistent. "Look, Ella," she had whispered, her voice filled with a reverence I'd never heard before. "That is strength. That is control. That is what you will learn." And so I learned. I learned the stances, the blocks, the katas. I learned to bow to my instructors, to the flags, to the portrait of the dojo's founder. But the person I was truly bowing to was my mother. The dojo became the only stage in my life where I could reliably earn her approval. At home, my good grades were met with a cursory nod. My artwork taped to the fridge would be taken down the next day to avoid clutter. But at the dojo, she would watch. For the entire hour, twice a week, she would sit on the hard wooden benches, her purse clutched in her lap, and she would watch me. And when Kenji's voice would single me out, "Excellent, Ella, a perfect front stance. Everyone, watch Ella," a rare, genuine smile would touch my mother's lips. It was a sliver of sunlight in a perpetually overcast world. That smile was the prize. That smile was everything. It became the food I lived on, and I would do anything to earn it. I pushed myself harder than anyone else. I stayed late to practice. I memorized every sequence, perfecting the angle of my elbow, the snap of my kick. My father would sometimes be the one to pick me up. He'd be waiting in the car, the glow of his phone illuminating his face. "Hey, kiddo, good class?" he'd ask, his eyes already drifting back to his screen. He was always on the periphery, his presence as faded and unremarkable as old wallpaper. He was kind, but in a distant, absent way. He was a footnote in the story my mother was writing for me. The white gi, at first stiff and awkward, became a second skin. It was the uniform of the daughter Eleanor wanted, the focused, disciplined warrior, and for a long, long time, I wore it with pride. I believed the performance was real. I thought the strength I was building was my own. I didn't understand that I wasn't just learning martial arts. I was being conditioned to obey, to please, to strive for the approval of a powerful figure, whether it was my mother watching from the benches or the master standing before me on the mat. The dojo was my sanctuary, my proving ground, the only place I felt seen. It would be years before I understood it was also my cage, meticulously constructed around me with my own mother's blessing. The transition was subtle, a slow tide coming in. The praise I had worked so hard for began to change. It started to feel different. For years, it had been public, a tool for inspiring the other students. Watch Ella's form. Listen to the power in Ella's kiai. But as I moved into my mid-teens, collecting belts like milestones, the praise became more personal, more private. It happened after the others had packed their bags and the chatter of parents had faded from the lobby. It would just be me, Kenji, and the vast, echoing space of the empty dojo. "You have a special spirit, Ella," he said to me one evening, as I was stretching after a particularly grueling class. I was 15. The other students were gone. My mom had called to say she was running late. A true warrior's focus. The others, they learn the moves. You understand the soul of the art. His words were like a warm blanket. To be seen as special, not just by my mother, but by him, it was intoxicating. It was the validation I had spent my entire childhood chasing. This was the beginning of the master's favor, an honor that set me apart. It began with him asking me to stay a few minutes late to help him demonstrate a complex technique for a video he was supposedly making for a martial arts journal. Then it became private lessons. "Your potential is limitless, Ella," he'd say, his voice low and conspiratorial. "But a group class can only take you so far. We must cultivate your gift properly." My mother was ecstatic. Her daughter, chosen for private tutelage by Master Kenji himself. It was the ultimate status symbol. "Of course, Sensei," she'd said on the phone, her voice bright with pride. "Whatever time you need. We are so grateful for the attention you are giving her." So, the dojo, once a public space filled with energy and community, became our private world. The familiar scent of polish and sweat was replaced by the heavy, sweet smell of the sandalwood incense he would light only when we were alone. The bright, even fluorescent lights were often switched off, leaving only the dim safety lights on, casting long, distorted shadows across the mats. The world outside the dojo's glass doors ceased to exist. And he began to use the language of martial arts, the very philosophy I revered, to break me down. He was a master of twisting concepts of discipline and submission into tools of psychological warfare. We'd be practicing a joint lock release, a technique of yielding to an opponent's force to find an opening. He'd hold my wrist, his grip firm, but not painful. "Yield to a greater force to control it, Ella," he'd murmur, his face close to mine. "Don't fight it. Flow with it. Find the weakness in its strength." But he wasn't talking about my imaginary opponent anymore. He was talking about him. He was teaching me to yield to him. He'd guide me through a kata, his hands on my hips to correct my posture, his fingers lingering just a little too long. "Empty your mind of resistance," he'd whisper, his breath warm on my neck. "A true martial artist doesn't think, she feels, she accepts. Let go of your tension." The instructions I had followed for a decade to perfect my form were now being used to dismantle my defenses. He would position a block I was practicing, moving my arm into place, and the movement would feel too much like an embrace. He was reframing intimacy as instruction, closeness as a form of higher learning. He isolated me with his favor, making me feel chosen, consecrated. "I don't share these deeper philosophies with anyone else," he'd tell me. "They wouldn't understand, but you do." I was his best student. I was his prized pupil. I drank in the praise, desperate and thirsty. I believed I was on a special path, ascending to a level of understanding no one else could reach. The daughter my mother always wanted, becoming the prodigy the master had anointed. The first time he crossed the final line, the room was dark, except for the single beam of a street lamp cutting through the blinds. We had just finished a session on internal energy, a lesson that involved more quiet meditation than physical movement. He told me to lie on the mat, to feel the ground's energy. He said he would help channel it. His hands, which had corrected my stance 1,000 times, were no longer the hands of a teacher. The language of martial arts fell away, replaced by a suffocating silence. In that silence, I still tried to apply his teachings. Yield to a greater force. Empty your mind of resistance. My training, the very thing my mother believed was my shield, became the weapon he used against me. It was the key that unlocked my own cage. I didn't realize I was his prey until long after the trap had sprung. I didn't understand that the title he truly wanted for me wasn't prodigy or warrior. The title he had been grooming me for all along was victim. And as I stand in this cold, silent living room, my mother's condemnation echoing in the space between us, the two images merge. The sacred dojo turned profane, and the pristine home turned into a courtroom where I am the sole defendant. Both were places I was supposed to be safe. Both were lies, and I am left holding the wreckage of both worlds with the undeniable growing proof of my failure blooming inside me. The silence in our house after my confession was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a bomb shelter, the air thick with what wasn't being said. My world, once defined by the sharp crack of a perfectly executed block or the respectful hush of the dojo, had shrunk to the four walls of my bedroom. Eleanor, my mother, had orchestrated this shrinkage with chilling efficiency. My phone vanished first, then my laptop. "To protect you from unnecessary stress, darling," she'd said, her voice smooth as polished stone. It was the same tone she used when discussing stock portfolios or charity galas. Cool, detached, managerial. She was managing a crisis. I was the crisis. The house became a terrarium, a house of glass. I was the specimen, pinned under my mother's constant, scrutinizing gaze. She moved through the rooms with a rigid purpose, her posture perfect, her expression a carefully maintained mask of maternal concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, like chips of flint. They looked at me, through me, but never saw me. They saw a problem, a complication, a stain on the pristine tapestry of the life she had so meticulously woven. Our conversations, if you could call them that, were a series of clipped commands, all orbiting the new center of her universe, the life growing inside me. "Eat," she would command, placing a tray on my bedside table. The food was always bland, nutritious, joyless. Chicken broth, steamed vegetables, lean protein. The baby needs the nutrients. Never you. I had ceased to exist. I was merely a vessel, a biological incubator for a legacy I didn't understand. "Sit up straight when you read," she'd instruct, walking past my door. "Slouching compresses the diaphragm. It's not good for the baby's oxygen supply. Turn that music down. The agitation can't be good for the baby. The baby, the baby, the baby." The word was a hammer, chipping away at my identity until I felt like nothing more than a walking womb. She would place her hand on my still, flat stomach, a proprietary gesture that sent a wave of nausea through me. Her touch was not loving, it was assessing, like a farmer checking on prize livestock. My father, Robert, was even worse. He had become a ghost in his own home. He'd perfected the art of being present and absent at the same time. He would flit through rooms on the periphery of my vision, a blur of beige sweaters and quiet desperation. If our paths crossed in the hallway, his eyes would dart to the floor, the wall, anywhere but my face. He'd murmur a greeting that was lost in the thick carpet. He'd pour me a glass of water, his hand trembling so slightly, and set it down without a word. As if I were a stranger, he was obligated to serve. His silence wasn't a lack of words. It was a physical presence. It was a roar of cowardice that echoed off the high ceilings, a deafening testament to his complete and utter abdication of fatherhood. He had chosen his side. He had chosen her. He had chosen peace over his own child. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light through my window. I'd watch the neighbors' cars come and go, listen to the distant sound of children playing in the street. It was a life I was no longer a part of. I was an exhibit in a museum of shame. And the more I sat in that silent, glass-walled prison, the more a terrifying clarity began to dawn. This wasn't protection. You don't protect someone by erasing them. You don't shield them from stress by becoming the primary source of it. They weren't guarding me. They were guarding a secret. Kenji's secret. Their secret. And I, with this unwanted life growing inside me, was the living, breathing evidence of a crime they were desperate to conceal, to muffle, to eventually erase. I was a monument to a shame they refused to acknowledge was never mine to carry. The suffocating quiet became my teacher. Stripped of my phone, my friends, my life, my senses sharpened. I started to listen, not just to the sounds of the house, the groan of the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the funereal tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, but to the spaces in between the sounds. I learned the rhythm of my mother's footsteps, the sharp, decisive click of her heels on the hardwood when she was on a mission, the softer, more pensive tread when she was in her study, her study. That became the epicenter of my new, constricted world. It was her command center, the one room where the door was always closed. It was from behind that heavy oak door that the whispers began. At first, they were just a low, indecipherable murmur. The cadence was familiar, though. It was her business voice, low, urgent, controlled. But there was something else in it, too, a frayed edge of something. Annoyance. Frustration? Then one evening, as I crept down the hall for a glass of water, I heard his name. Kenji. It was a single word, spoken in a hushed, clipped tone, but it hit me like a physical blow. I froze, my hand flat against the cool wall, my breath caught in my throat. It was him. She was talking to him. I pressed my ear against the wood, the grain rough against my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Her tone was all wrong. It wasn't the voice of a mother confronting the man who had violated her daughter. There was no rage, no accusation, no grief. It was collaborative. The tone of two partners discussing a difficult business negotiation that had gone awry. I could only hear her side, fragments of a conversation that made my blood run cold. The timeline is compromised. Of course, it's a delicate situation, but crying about it won't help. Financial implications are significant, Kenji. You know that. Financial implications. My mind reeled. What did money have to do with this? I felt a wave of dizziness, leaning my forehead against the door. This was worse than a cover-up. A cover-up was about shame, about hiding a terrible event. This felt structural, premeditated. A few nights later, I took a bigger risk. Eleanor was in her study again. The low murmur of her voice was a constant, low-frequency hum in the house. I waited until I heard my father's heavy sigh as he went to bed, the click of his own bedroom door shutting him away from the drama. Then I slipped out of my room and crept to her study door, my bare feet silent on the runner. This time, I didn't just press my ear to the door. I knelt, getting as close to the gap at the bottom as I could. The air smelled of old paper and her expensive, cloying perfume. Her voice was clearer now, edged with a frustration so sharp it was almost a physical thing. No, you don't understand. The emotional component was always the risk. A pause. She was listening. I imagined him on the other end, his voice calm, philosophical, manipulative. It doesn't matter what you thought, it matters what is. I'm handling it. But this fragility is infuriating. Another, longer pause. The silence stretched, and I could hear my own pulse roaring in my ears. I was about to pull away, terrified of the creak of a floorboard, when she spoke again, and the words she said shattered the last remnants of the world I thought I knew. They were not shouted. They were spoken in a low, venomous hiss, a spike of pure, undiluted resentment. She was supposed to be strong enough for this. A beat. Strong enough for you. For our plan. Our plan. The two words echoed in the silent hallway. They echoed in the hollow space inside my chest. Our plan. It wasn't my failure. It wasn't his crime. It was our plan. A plan that I was a part of. A plan that required my strength. A plan that involved him and my mother. I scrambled back from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I stumbled back to my room, my legs unsteady, and collapsed onto my bed, the room spinning. The words made no sense, and all the sense in the world. They were the key to a lock I never knew existed, opening a door into a darkness so profound I couldn't comprehend its depths. This wasn't a family protecting its reputation from a monster. This was a monster wearing the face of my mother, working in concert with another. I wasn't a casualty of a terrible crime. I was a pawn. A piece in a long, elaborate game I had been born into. A game whose rules I didn't know, and whose objective was a horror I couldn't yet name. My mother's next move was to bring in a professional. "You need to talk to someone, Ella," she announced one morning, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "To process this Event. The name she chose was Dr. Albright, a woman whose website showed her smiling in a field of wildflowers, her eyes promising a gentle, healing journey. The reality was a sterile office that smelled of lemon polish and deceit. Dr. Albright had the kind eyes from the website, but they were the placid, unblinking eyes of a doll. Behind them there was nothing. She listened to my mother's carefully curated version of the story first, how I, a sensitive and imaginative girl, had become confused after a period of intense martial arts training. Then it was my turn. As I spoke, my voice trembling, my words halting, Dr. Albright nodded and made sympathetic noises, but her questions were surgical strikes, designed to dismantle my reality. "And you admired him a great deal, this Master Kenji?" she asked, her pen poised over a notepad. "He was my teacher," I whispered. "An older, powerful man. It's not uncommon for young women to develop strong feelings in that kind of dynamic. Sometimes those feelings can be confusing. We can mistake a desire for approval for something else. It wasn't like that. But you went to these private sessions willingly, didn't you? You never screamed. You never fought back." "A black belt like you, one would think." She let the sentence hang in the air, a poisonous vapor. She called my trauma a cry for attention. She suggested I was struggling with the burdens of blossoming womanhood and had fabricated a narrative to make sense of my own complex feelings. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, delivered with a serene smile. I walked out of that office feeling smaller and dirtier than I had before. My mother, however, looked relieved. Dr. Albright had given her what she wanted, a professional, clinical framework for my supposed delusion. I was not a victim. I was a patient, unreliable, hysterical. This was their first real mistake. In their arrogance, in their certainty that they had me perfectly contained, they had overlooked one small detail. They took my phone and my laptop, but they let me keep my school-issued tablet. They assumed it was useless, locked down by the district's firewall, capable of accessing nothing but educational websites and my homework portal. They were wrong. That night, I waited until the house was asleep. I took the tablet into my bathroom, the only room with a lock. I stuffed a towel under the door, turned on the shower to create a wall of steam and noise, and sat on the floor, the cold tile a shock to my system. My fingers trembled as I typed. The school's filter was good, but it wasn't perfect. It blocked social media, but it didn't block health-related sites. And through a series of loopholes, from a health site to a resource page to a directory, I found it. A telehealth service. A list of therapists, hundreds of them, from all over the country. My heart pounded as I scrolled. I didn't want anyone local. I didn't want anyone my mother could possibly know or influence. I scrolled and scrolled, my eyes blurring, until a name stopped me. Dr. Anya Sharma. The name felt distant, foreign, safe. Her profile picture was simple, a woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a calm, serious expression. She wasn't smiling in a field of wildflowers. She looked like she listened. I requested an immediate consultation, my fee paid by a prepaid gift card I'd had tucked away in a drawer for months, a forgotten birthday present, a lifeline. 10 minutes later, a notification popped up. Dr. Sharma was available. I put in my earbuds, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Her face appeared on the small screen, life-sized and clear. She was in a simple room, books lining the wall behind her. "Hello, Ella," she said. Her voice was calm, deep, steady. It was the first voice in weeks that hadn't been laced with judgment or command. "My name is Anya. Thank you for reaching out. You can tell me whatever you feel comfortable sharing." And so I did. In hushed, frantic whispers, with the shower roaring and the fear of discovery a cold knot in my stomach, I told her everything. I told her about Kenji. I told her about the dojo. I told her about the baby. I told her about my mother's coldness, my father's silence, the prison my home had become. I told her about Dr. Albright's venomous kindness. I even told her about the whisper I'd heard through the door. Our plan. I expected skepticism. I expected cautious, clinical questions. I braced myself for the same gentle dismissal. Instead, when I finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, Dr. Sharma looked at me through the screen, her dark eyes filled with a profound, unwavering belief. She took a slow breath. "Ella," she said, her voice a lifeline thrown across a chasm of silence and lies. "Thank you for your courage in telling me this. I want you to hear me very clearly. Nothing you have described is your fault." "This is not your fault." The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. 4 simple words. This is not your fault. No one had said that to me. Not my mother, not my father, not a single person in my world. I had been so steeped in blame, my mother's, the therapist's, my own, that hearing it negated felt like a tectonic shift in my soul. A dam inside me broke. I started to cry. Not the frantic, scared tears from before, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs of pure, unadulterated relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't delusional. I was believed. It was my first act of defiance. My first successful punch thrown in a fight I was just beginning to understand. It was my first step out of the dark. In our next session, Dr. Sharma made a suggestion that felt both impossible and necessary. "I want you to write it down, Ella," she said. "Not for a court case, not for your parents, not for anyone else. Just for you. I want you to create a record of your truth. Take the power back by defining the narrative yourself." The idea terrified me. To write it down was to make it real, to give it shape and weight outside the chaotic confines of my own mind. But I trusted her. I found an old spiral-bound notebook from a forgotten 9th grade science class, its pages still faintly lined. The first touch of the pen to the paper felt like a transgression. I started to write. I didn't write a linear story. I wrote fragments, sense memories, moments that had been burned into my brain. The smell of the dojo at night. Not the daytime smell of sweat and clean wood, but the nighttime smell. Stale air, floor cleaner, and the faint, sweet scent of the incense Kenji would burn in his private office. The smell makes my stomach clench even now. The slick, cold feel of the training mats under my back. How they squeaked when he moved. How the sound was too loud in the empty room. His voice, that low, hypnotic rumble. Quoting ancient masters. "To conquer an opponent, you must first yield. Understand their force, flow with it, and then redirect it." He was talking about a wrist lock. He wasn't talking about a wrist lock. He was teaching me how to surrender to him. The exact words he used. "You are special, Ella. Not like the others. You have a warrior's spirit and a compliant heart. A rare combination. A perfect combination." He said it like a benediction. It felt like a cage. The ink bled the poison out of me, one painful, scratching word at a time. The notebook became a sacred, terrifying object. It was the repository of my truth, a black and white testament against the gaslighting world my mother had constructed. Dr. Sharma also encouraged me to write to someone I trusted, even if I couldn't communicate with them directly. The choice was obvious. Liam, my older brother. He had escaped 3 years ago for college on the opposite coast and had barely looked back. I understood why. He'd seen the cracks in our family's foundation long before I did. He and Eleanor had a relationship built on friction and arguments, his laid-back independence a constant affront to her need for control. I hadn't heard from him in months, and I didn't even have his current address. It didn't matter. I started writing him letters on loose-leaf paper, knowing they would never be sent. They were messages in a bottle I intended to smash against my own bedroom wall. "Dear Liam, I don't know if you'd even recognize the house now. It's so quiet. Dad just sort of evaporates whenever I walk into a room. And Mom, she's something else. She's playing the role of a lifetime, the concerned mother. But her eyes are like 2 little stones. She's angry at me, not for what happened, but for the inconvenience of it. for messing up the painting. I'm pregnant, Liam. It's Kenji's. I know you never liked him. You always said he gave you the creeps, that he was a performance artist of integrity. You were right. You were so right. They've taken my phone. I'm writing this on paper like we're in the 1800s. I feel like one of those women in a Victorian novel, locked in the attic with a case of the vapors. The worst part is, I think they're in on it together. Mom and him. I heard them. He's not the enemy she's protecting me from. He's the business partner she's trying to appease. In these unsent letters, I found my voice. I could be angry, sarcastic, terrified, and clear-eyed. I could articulate the full, dizzying scope of the nightmare without the fear of being contradicted or reinterpreted. I was building a case inside my own mind, forging my testimony page by page, letter by letter. I was becoming my own first witness. With this newfound fragile clarity came a crushing dose of reality. The more I wrote, the more I analyzed, the more I saw the architecture of my cage. It wasn't just made of my mother's lies and my father's silence. It was built with money and influence. One afternoon, I was staring out my window when a golf cart whizzed by on the street below. In it were two men. One was Kenji. The other was the town's chief of police. They were laughing. My blood went cold. I brought it up with Dr. Sharma in our next session, my voice flat with defeat. What am I supposed to do? He's a local god. He donates to everything. He built the new wing of the library. My parents are his biggest patrons, his biggest cheerleaders. Who is ever going to believe me? A troubled, pregnant teenager over the beloved Sensei Kenji? What you're describing, Ella, she said gently, is something we call institutional betrayal. It's when the systems that are supposed to protect you, your family, your community, the legal system, fail to do so, or worse, actively side with the person who harmed you. It's a profound secondary trauma. Institutional betrayal. The phrase was perfect. It gave a name to the towering, insurmountable fortress I was facing. It wasn't just Kenji. It was the whole world he had built, a world that my parents had enthusiastically helped construct. I had no money. I had no access to a lawyer. I had no credibility. Every door was locked. Every path was a dead end. The psychological weight of it was immense. A deep, heavy despair began to settle over me, thick as silt. What was the point of my notebook? What was the point of my unsent letters? They were just stories I was telling myself in a locked room. In the real world, power was the only truth that mattered, and I had none. The temptation to simply surrender was overwhelming, to just stop fighting, to let the current take me. I could let my mother and Dr. Albright define my reality. I could become the fragile, confused girl they wanted me to be. I could have the baby, let them handle the problem, and maybe, eventually, they would let me back into the world, a tamer, more compliant version of myself. It would be easier. It would mean an end to the constant, grinding effort of holding on to my own truth. The thought was seductive because it promised peace, a false peace, a peace born of utter defeat, but peace nonetheless. I would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling the fight drain out of me. The anger that had briefly flickered was being smothered by a blanket of hopelessness. Dr. Sharma called it a checkmate. I called it my life. Any move I made felt futile. I was a king with one square left to move, surrounded on all sides by their queen, their knights, their smiling, respectable pawns. And the despair whispered the oldest lie of all. It's over. You've already lost. The words echoed in the hollow space behind my eyes. A relentless, looping whisper. Our plan. Not his plan. Not her plan. Our. The word was a key, but I didn't yet know what lock it fit. It haunted the long, silent hours I spent confined to my room, a prisoner in a house that was supposed to be a home. It was a poison ivy vine, wrapping itself around the architecture of my reality. And I knew if I didn't find its root, it would strangle me. The opportunity came on a Tuesday, a night thick with the cloying sweetness of blooming jasmine from the neighbor's garden. My parents were attending a hospital fundraiser, a charity dinner where they would perform their roles as pillars of the community. My mother, elegant and poised in a sapphire dress. My father, a handsome, quiet shadow at her side. They were masters of the facade. Before they left, my mother paused at my door. She didn't enter. She never entered anymore. "We'll be late, Ella. Mrs. Gable will be downstairs if you need anything. Don't make any trouble." Her voice was a sterile instrument, devoid of warmth. She wasn't speaking to her daughter. She was addressing a problem, a piece of evidence that needed to be managed. I listened to the front door click shut, the sound of their car engine fading down the street until it was devoured by the suburban silence. For a long while, I didn't move. I just listened to the house settle. The groan of the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator. It was the sound of my cage. Then I rose. My movements were fluid, deliberate. The training Kenji had drilled into me for a decade, the control, the precision, the quiet economy of motion, was now a tool for treason. I slipped out of my room, a ghost in my own home, my bare feet making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. Mrs. Gable, a kindly, silver-haired woman, was absorbed in a historical drama in the living room, the television's flickering light, a comforting distraction. I crept past, my breath held tight in my chest. My destination was my mother's home office. The door was, of course, locked. It was her sanctuary, her command center, a place of immaculate order where bills were paid, investments were managed, and I now suspected conspiracies were hatched. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold fire that was becoming frighteningly familiar. For a moment, my reflection in the dark wood of the door stared back at me. A pale, gaunt girl with a secret swelling beneath her shirt. I didn't recognize her. I had watched a video once, late at night on my school-issued tablet. A tutorial on lockpicking for a character in a story I was trying to write. It seemed so distant now. A frivolous act from a life that no longer belonged to me. From the kitchen junk drawer, I'd palmed a single sturdy paperclip. My fingers, nimble and strong from years of gripping bamboo shinai and perfecting finger-strengthening exercises, unbent it, then fashioned a crude tension wrench and a rake from the two pieces. Kneeling before the lock, I felt a tremor in my hands. It wasn't just fear of being caught. It was the feeling of violation, of crossing a final, invisible line. My mother's privacy was an absolute, a law as immutable as gravity in our household. To breach it was to commit a profound act of rebellion. I slid the tension wrench into the keyway, applying the slightest pressure. Then, the rake. I remembered the video's narrator. "Listen. Feel the pins. You're not forcing it, you're persuading it." My entire world narrowed to the tiny dark space inside the lock. I could feel the faint vibrations through the metal, the minuscule shifts of the pins. One by one, I felt them catch, a series of soft, almost imperceptible clicks. It was a conversation in a language of pressure and release, and in that moment, I understood a terrible truth. Kenji had trained me for this. He had honed my senses, my patience, my fine motor control, teaching me to manipulate forces greater than myself. He had inadvertently given me the very skills I now needed to dismantle the world he and my mother had built. The final pin set, and the lock turned with a soft, metallic sigh. It felt less like a victory, and more like a final, damning confirmation. I pushed the door open. The air inside was cool and smelled of paper and my mother's faint, sharp perfume. Everything was in its place. The mahogany desk was clear except for a leather-bound blotter and a silver pen holder. The books on the shelves were arranged by color and size. It was the room of a woman who craved control above all else. A woman who would see an inconvenient pregnancy not as a family crisis, but as a messy variable in a meticulously crafted equation. I didn't know what I was looking for. A diary, maybe. A journal that would explain the coldness in her eyes, the chilling alliance in her voice. I started with the desk drawers. The top one held stationery, pens, and paper clips in neat section trays. The second held files. I pulled one out. Household Expenses, 2018. Another, Investment Portfolio. I sifted through them. my fingers tracing the crisp edges of the manila folders. Tax returns, insurance policies, car maintenance records. The mundane liturgy of a well-managed life. It felt like a deliberate smokescreen, a wall of normalcy designed to conceal whatever rot lay beneath. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath a thick folder of tax returns from a decade ago, almost hidden in the deep recess of the drawer, was a small, polished box. It was made of rosewood, the grain a swirling pattern of deep reds and dark browns. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a book. It was beautiful, elegant, and it felt utterly alien in this sterile environment. It hummed with a significance that made the hair on my arms stand up. It had a small, cheap brass lock, the kind that was more decorative than functional. My heart began a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of dread. Using the same paperclip, I jiggled the lock. It took less than 5 seconds. It sprang open with a pathetic little click. I lifted the lid. There was no diary. The first thing I saw was a stack of old photographs, their colors slightly faded. I picked one up. My mother. She was younger, maybe 20 or 21, her hair longer, wilder. She was laughing, her head thrown back in a way I had never seen before, and her arms were wrapped around a man. His back was mostly to the camera, but I recognized the set of his shoulders, the line of his neck. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped to the next photo. There he was, in full view, Kenji. He looked younger too, but his eyes were the same, dark, intense, possessive. They were on a beach somewhere, my mother wrapped in his arms, her face buried in his chest. It wasn't the chaste, respectful embrace of a student and master. It was the fierce, unapologetic clinch of lovers. My stomach twisted. I felt a wave of nausea, hot and acidic. I put the photos down, my fingers trembling. Beneath them was a bundle of letters, tied with a faded silk ribbon. The paper was thick, creamy, and expensive. The handwriting was Kenji's, the same elegant, sharp calligraphy he used to write inspirational quotes on the dojo's whiteboard. I untied the ribbon with numb fingers. I didn't want to read them. Every instinct screamed at me to close the box, put it back, and pretend I had never found it. But I couldn't. I had to know the root of the poison. I unfolded the first letter. My eyes scanned the page, catching phrases. My dearest Eleanor, the light of my dojo, a spirit as fierce as any warrior I have trained. It was a love letter, passionate and intense. Then, my eyes fell on the date at the top of the page, June 12th, 1998. The date punched the air from my lungs. I scrambled through the other letters, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read. July 1998, September 1998. All from the same year, a full year before my mother met my father. I knew their story by heart, a carefully curated myth she had told me 100 times. They'd met at a university fundraiser in the autumn of 1999, a whirlwind romance, a wedding the following spring. It was a lie, all of it. Then I found the one letter that changed everything. It was longer than the others, the writing more urgent, more precise. It wasn't just a love letter. It was a contract, a pact. My Eleanor, it began. I have thought of nothing else since we last spoke. The agony of it is a blade in my gut. My family's demands, the marriage they have arranged for me in Japan. It is a prison I cannot escape. They will never accept you. But to lose you, to lose the fire you have brought into my life, is a death I will not endure. We cannot be husband and wife in the eyes of the world, but we can create a bond that transcends it, a legacy that is truly ours. My blood ran cold. I read on, my vision blurring. You spoke of your plans to marry, to find a suitable man, a stable life. Use it. Use him. Give me what my future wife cannot. Give me a daughter, Eleanor, our daughter. You will raise her. You will bring her to me, to the dojo. You will train her in our philosophy, mold her in our image. She will not be his legacy. She will be mine. She will be the perfect vessel for our spirit, our art. She will be my partner, my successor, the one who understands the way as only our child could. It is a sacrifice, I know, but our love demands a testament greater than a marriage certificate. Give me a daughter, and she will bind us together forever. She will be our art, our life, our plan made flesh. The letter fell from my fingers. The room began to spin, a monstrous gift. My entire life, my training, the praise, the special attention, my mother pushing me harder, always harder, to be worthy of his approval. It wasn't for me, it was a performance, a long, elaborate, 17-year-long courtship gift from my mother to her lover. I wasn't a daughter, I was a project. I wasn't a person, I was a pact. The air in the office was thick, unbreathable. I scrambled out, managing to close the door and stumble back to my room just as a wave of violent sickness overcame me. I barely made it to the bathroom. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, retching until my throat was raw, I wasn't just throwing up food. I was throwing up my life, my childhood, my identity. Every memory was now tainted, every compliment a lie, every moment of perceived love, a carefully orchestrated piece of a grotesque theater. The truth didn't set me free. It burned me alive. In the days that followed, the fire consumed me. I existed in a state of silent, incandescent rage. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest, but the flames of betrayal burned hotter. They cauterized the wound, leaving something hard and cold in its place. When the fire finally died down, all that was left was ice, a pure, crystalline, and razor-sharp clarity. My father wasn't just weak. He was a prop, a placeholder, a means to an end, chosen for his stability and his pliability. His passive silence wasn't a failure of courage. It was a feature, not a bug. He was the perfect, unwitting stagehand in their long, sick play. And my mother, she wasn't just an enabler who looked the other way. She was the architect, the director, the grand designer of my life and my violation. She hadn't just handed me to the serpent. She had cultivated the garden for him, nurtured the tree, and polished the apple. The knowledge was a terrible liberation. There was no more confusion, no more desperate hope that I had misunderstood. There was only the cold, hard geometry of the truth. And with it, a new sense of purpose began to form in the icy void where my love for them used to be. My next session with Dr. Sharma felt different. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I laid out the facts with the dispassionate precision of a detective presenting a case file. The letters, the dates, the pact. There was a long silence on the other end of the video call. Dr. Sharma's face was a mask of professional composure, but I saw the shock in her eyes. It was a flicker, but it was there. "Ella," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is monstrous. There is no other word for it." "I know," I said. My own voice sounded flat, distant. "But knowing doesn't change anything. I'm still here. He's still out there, being praised as a community leader. She's still playing the role of the perfect wife and mother. I have copies of the letters, but what does that prove? A sordid affair from 2 decades ago. It doesn't prove what he did to me. His lawyers would tear me apart. They'd say I'm a scorned, delusional girl, making up stories because I found out my mother had a past. They would use her betrayal to invalidate his crime." "You're right," Dr. Sharma said, not trying to offer false hope. "A public battle in a courtroom would be brutal and likely unwinnable. They have money, reputation, and a story they've been perfecting for 20 years. You have a truth so dark, it's almost unbelievable." "So what do?" I asked, the ice in my veins cracking with a tremor of despair. "Do I just live with this? Do I let them win?" "No," she said immediately. "You don't let them win. But perhaps we need to redefine what winning looks like. You've been thinking like a victim, seeking justice from a system that isn't equipped to deliver it. It's time to start thinking like your enemy." The words hung in the air between us. Think like your enemy. "What do they value most?" Dr. Sharma asked, her tone shifting from therapist to strategist. "What is the absolute foundation of their world?" I didn't have to think. "Reputation," I said. "Honor. The way they are seen by other people. For Kenji, it's his image as a wise, untouchable master. His entire dojo is built on that myth. His wealthy patrons, the parents who entrust their children to him, They all buy into it. And your mother? The same, I whispered. Her perfect family. Her respected place in the community. The illusion of a life built on discipline and traditional values. It's all she has. It's what she chose over everything. Then that is their weakness, Dr. Sharma said. Their power is derived from a carefully constructed lie. A lie you now have the power to expose. Justice isn't always about a verdict in a courtroom, Ella. Sometimes it's about taking away the very thing your enemy cannot live without. You cannot destroy them with accusations they can deny, but you can destroy them with a truth they cannot escape. A new kind of plan began to form in my mind. It was not a plan for legal retribution. It was a plan for psychological annihilation. I wouldn't attack them with the crime they committed against my body. That was a secret battle I would continue to fight in here, with Dr. Sharma's help. I would attack them with the crimes they committed against their own sacred codes. I would use their own weapons against them. Reputation, secrets, and the very foundation of honor they pretended to possess. My training, once a source of shame, became my blueprint. I thought of a kata, a series of precise, devastating movements executed in perfect sequence. The first move would unbalance Kenji. The second would shatter my mother's foundation, and the final, finishing blow would be delivered by the silence that followed. I would not be the hysterical, pregnant teenager. I would be the calm executioner of their legacy. The serpent's plan was intricate and cruel, but my plan would be simple and final. I would take the truth, their truth, and turn it into a weapon so sharp it would sever them from their own lives. The first step was to break the isolation. My mother had cut me off from the world, but she had forgotten about Liam, my brother. He had escaped 4 years ago, going to a college across the country and rarely looking back. We weren't close, not in the way we'd been as kids. Her influence, her constant pitting of us against each other, had seen to that. But beneath the distance, there was a bond forged in the shared experience of growing up in that house. He knew her. He saw the coldness she tried to hide. Finding his contact information was a challenge. My mother had erased him from the family computer, from her contacts list. It was another form of control. But she'd underestimated the digital breadcrumbs everyone leaves behind. I used my school tablet, connecting to the library's public Wi-Fi to be safe. I found his university alumni page, a new photo, an email address. He looked older, more careworn than I remembered. For an hour, I stared at the blank email draft, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. How do you summarize a lifetime of lies and a universe of pain into a few sentences? How do you ask for help when you've been trained to be self-sufficient, to never show weakness? In the end, I realized that the truth, like a well-aimed strike, was most effective when it was direct and unadorned. I wrote a single sentence. Subject: the garden. The serpent in the garden had a name, and Mom was the one who let him in. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The following 3 days were the longest of my life. A part of me expected no reply. He had his own life, his own problems. Why would he want to be dragged back into the family drama he had so successfully escaped? Each morning, I woke with a stone of dread in my stomach. The silence in the house was heavier than ever, charged with my secret knowledge. I moved through my days like an automaton, eating the food my mother left for me, sitting through my online classes, my mind constantly replaying the letters, the photos, the plan. Then, on the third day, a Saturday afternoon, I was staring out my bedroom window when an unfamiliar car pulled into our driveway. It was a dusty, dark blue sedan, practical and unassuming. The engine cut out, and for a moment nothing happened. My heart hammered. Then the driver's side door opened. It was Liam. He was thinner than I remembered, with faint lines etched around his eyes that weren't there before. He wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored perfection of our father. But the look in his eyes as he stared up at the house, it was the same fierce protective glare I remembered from our childhood, the one he'd use whenever another kid tried to bully me on the playground. I flew down the stairs, my earlier lethargy gone. My mother was in the garden, her back to the house. I opened the front door just as Liam reached it. He stopped, his hand raised to knock. He took one look at me, at the unmistakable swell of my belly, the hollows in my cheeks, the haunted icy calm in my eyes, and his face crumpled. All the questions, all the explanations I had rehearsed became unnecessary. He saw the truth written on my body. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask what happened. He just stepped forward and pulled me into an embrace so tight it felt like he was trying to put my broken pieces back together. His voice was a thick, ragged whisper in my ear. "I should have never left you here with her," he said, and the words were thick with years of guilt and a sudden, terrible anger. "God, Ella, I'm so sorry." I leaned against him, the first true support I'd felt in months, and for the first time since I'd found the lockbox, the ice inside me began to thaw, just enough to let a single hot tear roll down my cheek. He wasn't just an ally. He was my witness. He was my cavalry. He was my family. The only part that was still real. The stage was set for the dojo's annual legacy dinner. It was the centerpiece of Kenji's year, a lavish affair held at a downtown hotel ballroom where wealthy patrons and long-standing families gathered to celebrate the dojo's philosophy of honor. It was a night of self-congratulation, a festival of hypocrisy, and it was the perfect venue for my plan. When my mother announced we were all attending, a week after Liam's arrival, I agreed without a fight. My compliance surprised her. She looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes, but my placid expression gave nothing away. I was playing the role of the reconciled, dutiful daughter. Liam's presence had changed the dynamic in the house. He was a silent, imposing barrier. He ran interference, his quiet disapproval a shield I could stand behind. My parents treated him with a cautious deference, unsure how much he knew, and his ambiguity was a weapon in itself. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully. A simple dark green dress, elegant but modest. It didn't hide my pregnancy, but it didn't flaunt it either. It made me a fact, not a spectacle. Liam stood by my side, a sentinel in a well-cut suit, his gaze sweeping the room with a cold, analytical anger. The ballroom was opulent, filled with the sound of clinking glasses and polite, moneyed laughter. Kenji moved through the crowd like a minor deity, accepting praise with a practiced humility that made my stomach churn. He stopped at our table. "Eleanor, Robert, you look wonderful," he said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "And Ella, it is good to see you here. You look healthy." The word hung in the air, a veiled reference, a subtle assertion of his power. Before I could reply, Liam stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "She's doing just fine," he said, his voice level and cold. Kenji's eyes met my brother's, and for a split second, his mask of serene wisdom slipped. He saw an adversary, not a disciple. He gave a curt nod and moved on. The dinner dragged on, speeches were made, awards were given. Finally, Kenji took the podium for the keynote address. He spoke of honor, of legacy, of the sacred trust between a sensei and his students. He talked about the way of the serene fist as a path to inner purity. Every word was a lie, a polished stone laid on the path to my personal hell. He was magnificent in his deceit. "And now," he concluded, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "it is my great honor to invite to the stage a woman whose dedication and belief have been a cornerstone of this dojo since the very beginning. Representing our founding families, please welcome Eleanor Vance." My mother walked to the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. She was radiant, poised. She spoke of family, of tradition, of the values Kenji had instilled in her children. She was weaving the final threads of the myth, perfecting the lie one last time. This was it. As the applause for her speech began to swell, I stood up. Liam gave my hand a brief, firm squeeze. I walked towards the stage, my steps even and measured. A hush fell over the room as I moved. People were confused. This was not on the program. I reached the podium just as my mother was turning to leave. I took the microphone from the stand. Her eyes widened in alarm. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Kenji, who stood frozen a few feet away. I looked out at the silent, expectant crowd. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a hysterical girl. It was calm, level, and carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. Master Kenji once told me that the greatest strength is not in the fist, but in the truth. I paused, letting the words settle. I turned my head slightly, gesturing to the magnificent antique katana displayed on a silk-draped stand behind the podium. It was his pride and joy, the symbol of his martial heritage. He told me the story of this sword, I continued, my voice clear and steady. A secret just between us, his favorite student. He told me it was a symbol of his family's honor, passed down through generations. But that was the story for public consumption. The real story, he said, was better. A murmur rippled through the room. Kenji's face was a stony mask, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. He told me it wasn't a gift, but a war trophy, stolen from a family in Okinawa during the war by his grandfather, a crime he was proud of. He said that true power lies in taking what you want and creating your own history, your own honor. I let the accusation hang in the air, a poison dart. I had recast him. In 30 seconds, he was no longer a wise master, but a common thief, a braggart whose entire legacy was built on a stolen object. The faces of his wealthy patrons were shifting from admiration to confusion to dawning contempt. I then turned my gaze from the sword to my parents, who sat side by side at the front table. My father looked bewildered. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. "There are other stolen legacies in this room," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. I reached into the small clutch I was carrying and pulled out a sheaf of papers. They were copies. The originals were safe with Liam. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry, I just held up the first one. "This," I announced, my eyes locking with my father's, "is a love letter. From Master Kenji to my mother, Eleanor." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. My mother's face went white as bone. "It's very passionate," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But the most important part is the date." I held the paper steady, though my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. "It's dated June 12th, 1998. I let the date sink in. My father's brow furrowed in confusion. He was doing the math. "That is a full year," I clarified, my voice echoing in the dead, tomb-like silence. "Before you two were married. A full year before you even met." The implication was a shockwave that flattened the room. My father's face, which had been a mask of confusion, slowly slackened into a dawning, soul-shattering horror. The story of his life, his whirlwind romance, his perfect marriage, was dissolving in front of 200 people. I walked down the steps from the stage. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked with the unhurried calm of someone who has already won. I approached our table and, without a word, I placed the stack of copied letters directly into my father's numb, unresisting hands. He stared at them as if they were venomous snakes. I leaned in close, my voice just for him, but in the profound silence, it carried. "I believe," I said, my words precise and devastating, "these belong to you." The silence that followed my words was not empty. It was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the room, suffocating the polite chatter and the clinking of glasses. It was a vacuum, and into it, every eye in that grand wood-paneled room was pulled towards the stage, towards me, towards the stack of yellowed envelopes I had placed so carefully on the podium. The microphone hummed, a low, electronic pulse that seemed to be the only sound left in the universe. Kenji, frozen mid-smile, looked like a statue caught in a lightning flash. The genial mask of the wise master was still there, but cracks were beginning to show at the edges. His eyes, which had always held a terrifying mix of paternal warmth and predatory calculation, were now wide, blank, with a dawning incomprehension that was slowly, horribly, morphing into panic. He looked from me to my mother, then back to me, a silent, frantic question in his gaze. My mother, Eleanor, was even more still. She stood beside me, a pillar of salt. The triumphant glow from her speech had been extinguished, leaving behind a waxy, pale shell. Her hands, which had been resting elegantly on the lectern, were now clamped onto it, her knuckles white, as if the polished wood was the only thing holding her upright. Her world, the one she had so meticulously constructed over decades, was dissolving in the glare of the stage lights. But my focus wasn't on them, not really. My gaze was fixed on my father. He sat at the head table, a man who had made a career out of being invisible in his own life. He looked at me, his face a canvas of confusion. Then his eyes drifted to the letters. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he reached out. His fingers, usually so hesitant, so unsure, were steady as they brushed against the top envelope. He picked it up. A collective, silent breath was held by the entire room. The patrons, Kenji's flock of wealthy, image-conscious benefactors, leaned forward. This was more than a family spat. This was a disruption in the very fabric of their orderly world. They had come for a predictable evening of self-congratulation and philanthropy, to honor a man they believed was the embodiment of discipline and honor. Now, they were witnesses to something raw and real, and their faces showed a mixture of morbid curiosity and dawning disgust. My father's eyes scanned the first few lines of the letter in his hand. I knew which one it was. A gushing, girlish confession from my mother, dated 6 months before she met him, describing in breathless detail her devotion to Kenji, her willingness to do anything for him, to be anything for him. He didn't need to read far. The date at the top was the first nail in the coffin of his reality. He picked up another letter, and another. His movements were mechanical, the motions of an automaton discovering its own programming. The pages rustled, a sound as loud as a scream in the crushing silence. His gaze lifted from the faded ink and traveled, with agonizing slowness, across the table. It passed over the half-eaten plates of salmon, the crystal water glasses, the pristine white tablecloth. It landed on my mother, still frozen on the stage. And then, his eyes, the color of a washed-out sky, found mine. For the first time, I think he truly saw me, not as his daughter, the quiet girl who did karate. He saw the swelling of my belly, a fact he had been desperately trying to ignore for weeks. He saw the truth of my words about the katana, a story that now seemed trivial in comparison. He saw all the pieces of his life, his passive marriage, his wife's obsessive devotion to this dojo, my own strange, isolated childhood, my current trouble, and they clicked into place, forming a picture so hideous, so monstrous, that it shattered him from the inside out. There was no yelling, no accusations. The Robert I knew would have shrunk, deflected, or simply shut down. But this was a different man. This was a man who had nothing left to lose because he had just discovered he never had anything to begin with. The denial that had been his shield for 30 years had been publicly, brutally ripped away. He carefully, precisely, placed the letters back on the table, aligning them into a neat pile. He folded his napkin and set it beside his plate. He pushed his chair back, the sound of its legs scraping against the polished floor a jarring intrusion. He stood up. He adjusted his tie, and without a single glance back at my mother, or at the ruins of his life, he turned and walked. His footsteps were even and steady, past the table of the city councilman and his wife, who stared, mouths agape, past the CEO of the local bank, who looked at Kenji with a new, cold appraisal, past all the pillars of the community whose respect my mother had craved like a drug. He walked through the ornate double doors at the back of the hall and disappeared into the night, the doors swinging shut behind him with a soft, final sigh. The spell was broken. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a low, ugly sound. People began to shift in their seats, looking at each other, then at Kenji. The mask was gone now. He was just a man, pale and sweating under the hot lights, his empire of honor exposed as a house of cards. They weren't seeing a revered master anymore. They were seeing a common thief, a man who had built his legacy on a stolen blade. And if he would lie about that, what else would he lie about? The whispers grew louder, colored with suspicion and contempt. The foundation of his power wasn't his skill or his philosophy. It was the perception of his integrity, and I had just shattered it. On the stage, my mother finally moved. Her hands fell away from the lectern. She looked at the empty space where my father had been, then at the closed doors. She looked at the faces in the crowd, faces that had adored her moments ago, now turning away from her in embarrassment and disdain. She was utterly alone, marooned on an island of her own making, the monstrous secret of her life's great bargain laid bare for all to see. The humiliation was absolute. I hadn't needed to speak of the nights in the dojo, of the way he twisted philosophy into permission, of the child growing inside me. I didn't need them to believe me, the hysterical, pregnant teenager. I just had to show them who they were. Liars, frauds. My revenge wasn't a bomb that destroyed everything in a fiery blast. It was a scalpel. I had found the disease at the heart of my family, at the heart of this community, and with a few precise, deliberate cuts, I had excised it. I had cut them all out of my life. Liam's hand found the small of my back, a warm, solid pressure that anchored me in the swirling chaos. "Come on, Ella," he whispered, his voice low and steady. "It's over. Let's go home." Home. The word felt strange, alien. The house I grew up in was never a home. It was a stage set for my mother's ambitions. I let him guide me off the stage, down the side steps, away from the spotlight. No one tried to stop us. We were invisible now. Our purpose served. As we walked through the lobby, I could hear the sounds from the hall behind us. Not anger, but a kind of hurried, panicked disintegration. And the sound of an empire collapsing under its own weight. The night air was cold and sharp, a welcome shock after the stale, superheated atmosphere of the dining hall. It smelled of damp earth and distant rain. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with it, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in 10 years. Liam led me to his old, beat-up car, the one thing he'd kept from his life here. He opened the passenger door for me, and I sank into the worn seat, the fabric familiar and comforting. We drove through the sleeping town, the streets empty and glistening under the orange glow of the streetlights. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in the silence of that room. Liam just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally resting on the center console, close to mine. It was enough. He was my witness, my ally, my brother. He was the only piece of my family that was real. We didn't go back to the house on the hill. We went to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with a flickering neon sign and thin walls. Liam paid in cash. Inside the small, anonymous room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap floral bedspread rough beneath my fingers. I was still wearing the simple black dress I'd chosen for the evening. It felt like a costume from another life. Liam came out of the bathroom with a glass of water. He handed it to me. "You did it," he said, his voice full of a quiet awe. I took a sip. The water was cold. "I did," I said. My own voice sounded distant. I felt strangely hollow, not triumphant, just empty. The anger that had been my fuel for weeks, the cold, hard rage that had allowed me to plan and execute my revenge, was gone. And in its place was a vast, quiet emptiness. Over the next few weeks, news trickled in, delivered by Liam in short, factual reports. He was my shield from the fallout. The house was on the market. A for sale sign stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, a public marker of the implosion. The dojo was shuttered. A simple sign on the door cited personal reasons. The whispers had done their work. Kenji's fraudulence, the lie about the katana, was a concrete, easily digestible scandal. It was far more damaging to his reputation among the town's elite than any messy, unprovable accusation of abuse would have been. He and his honor were a joke. Sometime in the third week, we heard he'd left town, vanished, another ghost. And my mother? She was left adrift, a social pariah in the very community she had worked so tirelessly to conquer. The friends who had flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She was the woman whose husband had walked out on her in the middle of the legacy dinner. The woman whose secret life with the disgraced sensei was now the town's most salacious gossip. She had sacrificed her daughter for a pedestal, and now that pedestal had crumbled into dust, leaving her with nothing. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a kind of bleak, tragic understanding. She had built her entire identity on a lie, and now the lie was all she had left. Liam found us a small 2-bedroom apartment in a city 3 states away, a place where the streets had unfamiliar names and no one knew our story. It was spare and clean, with white walls and big windows that let in the afternoon light. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The oppressive weight of my past was still there, but it was distant now, a storm on a far horizon rather than a torrent overhead. My pregnancy progressed. My body, which had felt like a prison, a crime scene, was now just my body. It was changing, growing, preparing for a life that was separate from the violence of its conception. Liam was there, through all of it. He went with me to doctor's appointments. He learned to cook things that didn't trigger my morning sickness. He sat with me in the evenings when a wave of grief or fear would wash over me. He never offered easy platitudes. He just sat, a quiet, constant presence that said, "You are not alone." And in the quiet solitude of that anonymous apartment, I made a decision. It was the first decision in my entire life that felt completely, wholly my own. It wasn't for my mother, or for Kenji, or even for Liam. It was for me, and for the child inside me. Open adoption. The thought was agonizing. How could I carry this baby, feel her kick, imagine her face, and then just give her away? But then I thought about the alternative. Raising her in the shadow of my trauma, her life forever tied to the story of my abuse. I wanted more for her. I wanted her to have a life that began with love and stability, not with the ashes of my past. I wanted her to have a father who chose her, a mother who wasn't broken. Liam helped me find an agency. They connected us with a couple, Mark and Sarah. They had been trying for a child for years. When we met them over a video call, they were kind and open, their eyes full of a gentle hope that was almost painful to see. They asked me questions, not about the father, but about me. What music did I like? What was my favorite book? What did I dream about? They wanted to know the person their child was coming from. The day my daughter was born was a blur of pain and fierce, earth-shattering love. I held her in my arms, this tiny, perfect person with a fuzz of dark hair and my father's quiet eyes. I named her Chloe, which means new green shoot, a new beginning. I spent 2 days with her in the hospital, memorizing the shape of her hands, the scent of her skin, the sound of her soft breaths. It was the hardest, kindest thing I have ever done. When Mark and Sarah came to the hospital, they brought a small, hand-knitted blanket. Sarah wept when she saw Chloe, a soft, grateful sound. Mark looked at me, his eyes full of a respect and understanding that healed a small, broken part of my soul. "We will tell her about you," Sarah whispered, her hand on my arm. "We will tell her that her first mother was the strongest person we have ever met." I placed Chloe into her arms. It felt like tearing a part of myself away. But as I watched them look at their daughter, their faces shining with a pure, uncomplicated joy, I knew I had made the right choice. I had not abandoned my daughter. I had given her a future. A few weeks after we came home from the hospital, on a cool autumn evening, I took the box from the back of my closet. Inside, folded neatly, was my old white G, the one I had earned my black belt in. The one I had worn for 10 years, its fabric softened with 1,000 washes, stained with sweat, and I now realized, with shame. It was the uniform of my imprisonment, the symbol of everything I had been and everything I was trying to escape. I carried it out to the small, patchy lawn behind our apartment building. Liam had bought a small metal fire pit. He helped me set it up on the concrete patio. I unfolded the GI one last time, the heavy cotton familiar in my hands. I ran my fingers over the embroidered patch of the dojo, the way of the serene fist. A bitter laugh escaped me. I folded it carefully and placed it inside the pit. Liam lit a piece of kindling and handed it to me. For a moment, I hesitated. This was the last piece of that life. Burning it felt so final, but that's what I needed, an ending. I dropped the flame onto the fabric. It caught slowly at first, a small orange line creeping along the hem of the jacket. Then, as the heat grew, the flames leaped up, hungry and bright. They consumed the white cotton, turning it black, then gray, then orange again. I watched the smoke curl up into the darkening sky, carrying with it the smell of burning cloth and a decade of pain. I watched until the symbol of my captivity, the armor I had been forced to wear, turned to nothing but fine gray ash, scattered by the evening breeze. A year can feel like a lifetime. Or maybe it's just the time it takes for a new one to begin. The sun is warm on my face, filtering through the leaves of a large oak tree in a city park. The air smells of cut grass and blooming flowers, a world away from the sterile scent of lemon polish and sweat that defined my youth. I am on my feet, grounded, feeling the earth beneath me. Around me, in a loose circle, are a half-dozen women. They are all different ages, different shapes, different backgrounds. A young college student with anxiety etched around her eyes. A middle-aged woman whose shoulders are permanently hunched from years of stress. A retiree with a kind face and the slow, careful movements of someone relearning her own body. We are not here to fight. We are not here to defend. I take a deep, slow breath and they mirror me. Let the air fill you, I say, my voice calm and even. Feel it take up space. This space belongs to you. We move together, but not in unison. We flow through a series of slow, deliberate motions that I created myself. It's not yoga, not dance, not martial arts. It's something else. It's part reclamation, part prayer. A new kata, my kata. It tells a different story for the body. A story not of impact and resistance, but of release and presence. One movement involves slowly uncurling the fingers, as if letting go of a fist held too tight for too long. Another is about rooting the feet into the ground, feeling the connection, the stability that comes from within. There are no belts here. No titles, no hierarchy. My strength is no longer measured by the color of a belt or the approval of a master. It's not measured by my ability to break a board or win a trophy. It is measured in the quiet peace I feel in my own skin. It's measured in the way the sun feels on my arms, in the easy rhythm of my own breathing. It's measured in the letters I get from Mark and Sarah, filled with pictures of a smiling, thriving little girl named Chloe who has my eyes and her mother's joyful laugh. She is happy. She is safe. She is loved. That is my victory. I never got justice in a courtroom. Kenji was never held accountable for what he did to me, not in the way the world understands accountability. My mother never apologized, never acknowledged the depth of her betrayal. My father is a ghost, living a quiet life somewhere in another state, a man permanently broken by a truth he couldn't face. By all conventional measures, I did not win. But I wasn't fighting for a conviction. And I was fighting for my life, and I got it back. I look at the women in my class, each of them moving through their own story, finding their own breath, reclaiming their own space. I see the tension in the young student's shoulders begin to ease. I see a small, genuine smile on the face of the retiree. We are all learning a new way. I am the master of my own way now, the architect of my own peace. And as I stand here, in the gentle warmth of the afternoon, surrounded by a quiet strength that is both mine and ours, I know that I am finally, completely free. Every one of us has a story hidden in the silence. Some are stories of quiet pain, others are of unexpected strength. What's the story you've been holding on to, waiting for the right moment to tell? Share a piece of it in the comments below, because sometimes just speaking the truth is the first step to reclaiming your own life.